Hi, welcome to the Baseball Nation show here on SB Nation's YouTube channel. I'm Rob Nyer.
I'm Grant Brisby.
And there are so many great stories this week that we really don't have time to talk about Felix Hernandez's perfect game, which I saw at Safeco Field. That same day, just about an hour or two before Felix took the mound, we got news that Melky Cabrera, leading the National League in hits, probably their best player this season, to that point, had been suspended for 50 games, testing positive for testosterone back in July, it seems. And Grant, by the way, for everyone who doesn't know, follows the Giants like nobody follows the Giants. Grant, how does this affect the Giants' pennant chances?
It's kind of a fine how do you do. It doesn't help them and their pennant chances, that's for sure. But Melky Cabrera, he's like the player that the way people think steroids works, you would think that that's how it worked for Melky. You know, all of a sudden you're a bad player, you take steroids, and now you're great. You know, that's kind of how the layman thinks that steroids work, the perception. And it follows that with Melky. That's probably not the case, but he was certainly great for the Giants this year. I don't know if he was going to be as good if he's going to keep hitting 350, but he was fantastic. He was a middle-of-the-order presence that they've been lacking for a couple of years, and they don't really have any other good options. I mean, they just don't have someone from the minor leagues who can come up. They don't have any good trade options, so they're going to have to make do with some internal guys that just aren't nearly as good.
And well, they did trade for Hunter Pence, of course, before the trade deadline, and I think there's been some speculation that they knew this suspension was coming, and that's why they traded for Pence, which seemed like a little bit of a curious move at the time, but it makes a lot more sense now. The other thing that's broken just this week is that apparently Melky Cabrera or his handlers, somebody set up a fake website, made up a fake drug that he claimed that he took without knowing that it was contained a banned substance. And there's been some talk about his punishment, which would leak into the postseason or next season, being increased even further.
Yeah, I think that there will be some extra suspension added on. I have no idea how much, but Major League Baseball is not going to let anyone get away with that. I mean, that's just out and out fraud. I'm picturing this great GeoCities website with flashing GIFs and spinning syringes and things like that. I can't imagine what that fake website looked like. It was probably really legit looking. I mean, they were trying to deceive Major League Baseball, deceive some pretty smart people, I would think. And Major League Baseball is not going to let that stand. It's going to be interesting to see how much. I'm thinking, at least another 25 games. That's just completely off the top of my head. But that's a big step. I mean, it goes to show exactly what you're going to do for $60, $70 million, which is what Melky stands to lose because he got popped for this.
Right. Well, I mean, he might have made the same money if he hadn't used it, because we don't know how it helped him. I mean, that's the thing. I'll actually be a little surprised if he gets a further suspension. I'm not sure baseball has the power under the collective bargaining agreement to suspend him for that. They probably should, and they probably will in the future. But if it's not spelled out very clearly, I'm not sure Bud Selig can do anything about that.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. I have no idea what's in the collective bargaining agreement when it comes to like the very fine details. But speaking of performance-enhancing drugs, this is a good way to segue into Roger Clemens possibly coming back, which is it's bizarre to say it out loud. Roger Clemens might be making a comeback. I mean, he's 50, and it's been a few years since he's been in the majors. I mean, this can't be serious, really. I mean, this can't be real.
I'm not sure. It's funny, when the story first broke on Monday, I sort of made a joke about it. I just figured that it was a one-game stunt. Clemens wanted to pitch. Why not? Pitching's fun. It's an independent league team. They do these sorts of things all the time, these one-game stunts. Buck O'Neill batted in a game a year or two before he died in one of those games. So I figured it's just one of those weird little things, and it'll be a one-day story. And I made a joke basically suggesting it was a tryout for the Astros. Well, then 3 hours later, we find that the Astros actually watched him pitching recently, and there have been at least some suggestions that Clemens is looking to get back to the major leagues. I'm still not sure I buy it. Until he says that, I won't believe it. But it's a bizarre story, and we should remember that Clemens was a decent pitcher the last time he pitched. He stays in great shape, apparently, and he's basically the same age as Jamie Moyer was when he won a game earlier this season. So I don't know that it's impossible. What about you? Do you think he could actually pitch and not be terrible in the National League?
From the layman's perspective, I watched video that Baseball America posted of him working out, and it's obviously not going to be a full speed workout. He wasn't really trying to impress anyone. It seemed like he was doing a training session with high school kids, and he looked okay. I mean, it wasn't like he was throwing Evises up there. I guess it's possible. If anyone could do it, I mean, why not the greatest pitcher, one of the greatest pitchers in the history of baseball? I mean, if anyone can do it, why not that guy in an era where medical science is advanced? Older players are playing for longer, and he keeps himself in great shape. If anyone can do it, why not him? It still seems like the most likely explanation is that we're never going to see Roger Clemens in a major league game again.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think that Clemens, because he doesn't throw as hard as he used to, not nearly as hard, I think he would need a trick pitch. He doesn't have a knuckleball. He doesn't have Jamie Moyer's changeup. He would need to have a great splitter, something a fantastic off-speed pitch to mix in with his 87-mile-an-hour fastball.
Like a gyro ball.
Yeah, that would be great if you could learn that. It'd be fun to see it on TV finally. But I'm not convinced he couldn't be decent. You know who needs him, though, is not the Astros, because their season's over. All he would be doing is taking innings away from a young pitcher who might have something more interesting to do with them. I'll tell you what, the Angels are on a slide lately. They are, look, if you'd have told me 2 months ago that the Angels would be 4 games behind the A's in the wild card standings, I would have thought you were nuts. But it's happened, and it's happened in large part because the Angels pitching has gone south. Just a few guys. I mean, look, Jared Weaver's great. Has been great all season. The other 4 guys in the rotation, Zack Greinke, 6.19 ERA in 5 starts since being traded from the Brewers. C.J. Wilson, 0-5. 5.70 ERA in 10 starts since June. Irvin Santana, 6-10, 5.59 ERA all season. He's been horrible. And Dan Herron with a 6.63 ERA in 11 starts since May. Basically, 4/5 of their rotation has been terrible for either all or much, or in Greinke's case, part of the season. And you wonder if they can pull out of this thing. I mean, right now they have, Baseball Prospectus says they have basically a 1 in 5 chance of reaching the playoffs. So I guess the question is, are the Angels almost dead?
It was hard to see coming. I mean, after the initial Pujols weirdness, and once he started getting rolling and Mike Trout was up, I mean, they looked like an unbeatable team. They looked like they were, not even one piece away from being a really complete team. They looked just like a totally complete team. And then they got Zack Greinke. So you figure they were just, adding to their riches. But it's been a mess. I mean, Zack Greinke, he's given up 4 earned runs in each of his last 4 starts. The most he had given, or the longest streak he'd have with 4 earned runs or more was 2 games. And then he gets to the Angels, and all of a sudden he's going on this 4-game stretch where he's been pretty miserable. His control's been wonky. He's been walking people, which certainly doesn't fit what Greinke's been doing over his career. Herron's been a mystery all season. His strikeout to walk ratio has been stellar as always, but he's been giving up home runs. Santana's been awful. Everything's a mess. Even C.J. Wilson. I mean, he looked to be a fringe Cy Young contender at one point early in the season with his teammate, and he's been a mess. I don't know if they can pull out of it. They certainly have the talent, the names to pull out of it. I mean, it doesn't take much to go on a nutso run like the Cardinals did last year. So if anyone could do it, the Angels could. But time is getting, it's running out.
Yeah, and the problem is that the talent definitely is there. Those pitchers, I'm not optimistic about Santana, but Wilson, who was an all-star, by the way, and Greinke and Herron, all those guys pitched well in the past. They'll probably pitch well in the future, but to be 4 games out in the wild card standings with 4 teams ahead of you, I mean, I think the Angels are better than the Orioles and the A's and the Tigers, but catching 3 teams, passing 3 teams over the course of basically 6 weeks, 5.5 weeks, that's a very difficult thing to do. So it's going to be tough, and they look like a lock a month ago for a playoff spot, or near a lock. In fact, they were very close to catching the Rangers in the AL West, and it just did not happen. It's inexplicable. It's another great example of how hard it is to predict baseball, because you just would not have guessed this.
Yeah, I mean, in a 500-game season, you would expect them to overtake the Orioles and the A's, but not so much in 162. You wrote something recently about the Royals and their young lineup and how it's finally starting to look like it was supposed to look when they were a dark horse, preseason, kind of, sort of popular pick to at least contend in the AL Central. So are they, close to having their optimum lineup and doing something for real next year?
Well, I think the lineup is going to be real next year. The lineup, I think the Royals will probably rank in the top 5 or 6 in runs scored next year in the American League, if not next year, the year. I mean, the amazing thing about this lineup is that everybody is locked up through 2015 at least. So that gives them a 3-year window, at the least, a 3-year window where they should score plenty of runs to contend. I mean, it's really sort of amazing how many good young hitters they have. They have a shortstop who can hit. They have a catcher who can hit. They have a second baseman, in my opinion, who can hit, although he has not. Talking about Johnny Giavotella, he's been terrible in the majors, but his minor league numbers suggest a guy who can hit. And then you've got Billy Butler, who's locked up, and Eric Hosmer, and Alex Gordon, all of whom have demonstrated that they can hit. Well, Hosmer hasn't hit this year, but he did hit last year. Did hit in the minors. I just think it's going to be, people are going to be raving about the Royals lineup from the rest of this season on, now that everybody's basically in place, with one exception. And over the coming seasons, they should be really good. Now, there is one hole. They're still playing Jeff Francoeur in right field because he's got a contract, a decent-sized contract. But to take his place, Royals fans can hope. They have Will Myers, who's one of the best hitting prospects in the minors. When you add him to that lineup, it's really going to be a fun team to watch.
Yeah, no, I agree. Now it's just going to be that simple task of finding a starting rotation, right? Yeah, I mean, maybe they'll do some stopgap. I think they tried the stopgap thing, with Bruce Chen, getting Jonathan Sanchez, who's going to be available as a free agent again. So that could be a possibility. But I think when the lineup's that good, there's a hope that you can just kind of run into a rotation that's somewhat good. Whether it takes Danny Duffy coming back from Tommy John surgery, or Felipe Polino coming back from the same surgery. I think that there's a hope that they can do it, just run into a rotation that's at least competent. And if it doesn't happen next year, like you said, there's a pretty good window. I like what the Royals are doing. I mean, Dayton Moore looks like a genius for locking up Salvador Perez and Escobar the way he did. Those contracts were really, really early on in the arbitration process. But now if they continue to hit like they're hitting, it's going to look like a bargain for a long, long time. That was a really kind of interesting pair of moves that he did.
Yeah, I like those deals. I thought that the Gordon contract maybe was a little long, and I certainly didn't care for the 2-year deal with Francoeur. But I think everybody agrees that if you can lock up good young players through or past their free agency eligibility, you should do that. And they've done a good job of that, and they've done a great job of developing young hitters, drafting them. The trade for Escobar and Lorenzo Cain, who came over in the Greinke deal when they traded him to the Brewers, have worked out really well. And their best pitching prospect came over in that deal as well, Jake Odorizzi, who's done really well this year in Double and AAA, has to be penciled into the rotation next season. But again, they have to find 3 or 4 other guys. I think they're going to have to sign one good free agent this winter. not a Jonathan Sanchez type. And maybe they bring Guthrie back, who's been really good lately for them. I don't know if they can afford him, but they need to come up with at least one veteran starting pitcher to anchor that rotation because they haven't had that this year. But they could be interesting next year, and certainly the 2 years after that if they can find some pitching. Let's finish up. Yeah, I would, as a fan, I would love to see it for a week. I'd love to see Clemens in a Royals uniform. That'd be a lot of fun. Let's wrap up with, it's funny. People have been raving about how close everything is this year, but and the wild card standings certainly are interesting, but the division races are not. We're barely into late August, and the division races are not all that competitive. You could argue, I guess, that the AL East, the Tampa Bay Rays have been so hot; they're only 4 games behind the Yankees. That could get interesting. That would be a lot of fun, by the way, to see those 2 teams battling it out in September. But there are only 2 races right now that have a gap of less than 4 games. AL Central, White Sox continue to hold off the Tigers. As of Tuesday afternoon, White Sox are 2 games ahead of the Tigers. And in the NL West, we mentioned the Giants earlier, it's a fantastic race. I mean, I think there's nothing better for me as a baseball fan than the Giants and the Dodgers battling it out down the stretch. So I'm really looking forward to that one. I hope it stays close because it looks like the Diamondbacks are out of it. So it looks like just those 2 teams. So what are the keys in your mind? We'll get to the AL in a minute. What are your keys in the Giants and Dodgers race?
It's hard. The Giants need to find a consistency in their lineup, I think, and the Dodgers, in a way, do too. The Giants, for 1 game, had their premium lineup with Hunter Pence in there, Pablo Sandoval healthy, and Melky Cabrera. And now that's not going to happen. Now you're going to have, instead of Melky Cabrera, Gregor Blanco, you're going to have Justin Christian picking up a lot of at-bats, maybe Brett Pill roaming the outfield. So they're going to have to try some different permutations with the lineup, and that's going to be a big part. But also, there's a couple of wild cards with Lincecum. What's Lincecum going to do? Is he going to be any kind of good? Is he going to be a help at all? Is he going to at least eat innings or give some sort of value, or is he going to be the terrible Lincecum from the first half? He's been much better in the second half. He's had some ups and downs, but not nearly as extreme as he was in the first half. So I think that's going to be the big question for the Giants. And for the Dodgers, it's going to be finding some offense as well, getting Victorino back to his 2011 self, as opposed to what he was doing with the Phillies this year. Kind of finding offense wherever they can take it, getting Juan Rivera going if that's even possible now. Things like that. So it's going to be interesting. Yeah, I mean, I love Giants-Dodgers races, obviously, and they're pretty much why you follow baseball, stuff like that.
Yeah, and I think especially for those of us who live in the Pacific time zone, it really gives you some. For me, it's the best thing to turn on the TV at 7 or 8 o'clock at night and have those games happening. So this has been great, and there'll be more down the stretch. In fact, the Giants and Dodgers finished the season with a series against one another, which could easily determine who wins that division. Could be a lot of fun. I think the key is probably Lincecum. Barry Zito is Barry Zito. He's not going to get any better. We know Vogelsong, Kane, Bumgarner are all going to pitch well. Lincecum seems like the wild card in this race right now. We have no idea what we're going to see from him down the stretch. And in AL Central, White Sox can continue to hold off the Tigers as they have for the last month or 2. The Tigers had a big chance over the last weekend to take advantage when the White Sox were swept by the Royals. They couldn't do it. I think they lost 2 out of 3. So they're still a couple of games behind as of Tuesday afternoon. I think on both of those clubs, everybody's basically healthy, and they're just sort of playing things out at this point. Maybe for the White Sox, one big key is Chris Sale, who's never thrown this many innings before. Can he continue to pitch as well as he's pitched, as sort of a marginal Cy Young candidate at this point? But the White Sox, I think, on balance, might be a little better than the Tigers, which was not expected. But the run differential, anyway, says that they have the upper hand.
Yeah, it was, before the season started, the Central was supposed to be the one division that wasn't up in the air. In the West, you had the Giants and the Diamondbacks, and in the Central, you had the Cardinals supposed to be fighting it out with the Reds, and all the other divisions, you were supposed to have these great battles, but the Central was supposed to be the Tigers and the Tigers to lose. Prince Fielder and Miguel Cabrera were going to combine for 90 home runs or something. But hasn't happened so far. It's been probably one of the best races, obviously in the American League.
Well, I wish we had more than 2 pennant races to talk about. Maybe we will. You never know. But I am thrilled to have 2 because I think that that's the best thing that baseball has to offer a diehard fan is a great pennant race. And maybe we'll have 2 or 3 of them down the stretch. That would be great. And if so, we'll be talking about them right here. If you have any questions for us, feel free to drop into Twitter. Go to @SBNBaseball. Send us a tweet with the hashtag Baseball Show, and we'd love to get to your questions next week. Until then, I'm Rob Nyer.
And I'm Grant Brisbee, and we will see you next week.